The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like machines counting down to something terrible. Ashley Cooper had been working the night shift at Seattle General in Raleigh for 8 months, and the rhythm of the ward had become her entire world, the beep of monitors, the hiss of ventilators, the soft pad of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum that never quite came clean. 8 months of rebuilding. 8 months of being invisible, which was exactly what she wanted. Nobody asked questions about the quiet nurse with steady hands and scars that ran across her left palm like longitude lines. Nobody asked about the faded unit patch she'd sewn into the lining of her jacket, insurance against the day someone recognized what she was trying to forget. The night shift meant fewer administrators, fewer eyes, fewer chances that someone would connect the dots between Ashley Cooper, RN, and Major Ashley Cooper, retired, and all the versions of herself she'd left behind in Marjah. The ER at 2:38 a.m. had a specific kind of silence, not peaceful, but provisional. A held breath. The kind of quiet that existed only because nothing catastrophic had happened yet. She was checking vitals on a post-op patient in Bay 7 when the paramedic call came through the radio. Trauma. Male. Shrapnel wounds. No identification. ETA for minutes. The charge nurse, a woman named Torres who'd been working Seattle General for 16 years and had learned never to ask too many questions, glanced at Ashley from the central station. "You're on it?" Ashley was already moving toward Trauma Bay 1, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. The snapping sound echoed across the bay like a punctuation mark. Her hands moved through the setup with the kind of muscle memory that came from doing something 10,000 times. Trauma sheets. Saline bags. 2 units of O-negative hanging. The suction canister. The rapid infuser disconnected and ready. She'd learned long ago that preparation was its own form of prayer. The ambulance doors burst open at 2:43 a.m., and the paramedics came through fast, controlled chaos, every word clipped and precise. Male, early 40s, estimated blood loss significant, shrapnel embedded in left shoulder and upper back, vitals tanking in the ambulance, no wallet, no phone, no ID of any kind. The stretcher rolled into Bay 1 like a ship coming into dock, and the paramedic kept talking even as they transferred, found him in an alley off 5th, conscious but not coherent, kept asking for a radio, kept saying something about coordinates. Ashley took position at the patient's left side. The standard assessment began. Her eyes moved across the wound pattern. Shrapnel wounds had a specific geometry, a specific signature. Her hand steadied the trauma sheets as the patient's shirt came away, revealing skin mapped with scars, old and new both. Her breath came even. Her pulse stayed normal. This was just another patient. Just another body that needed fixing. And then she saw it. The tattoo on his left shoulder blade. Faded now, a decade past its sharpness, but unmistakable. The Ranger tab. The scroll beneath it reading 75th Regiment. Below that, a date, the 14th of June, 2009. The date Marjah became everything. Her hands froze mid-examination. 1 second. 2. The breath she took was the kind that came from compartmentalized muscle memory, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way they taught you when you might die if you flinched. Her eyes tracked up the patient's neck. The jaw. The face turned away but the profile unmistakable. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hendricks. The presiding officer. The man whose signature had moved across a piece of paper in a military courtroom and erased her career. The court-martial in Marjah after the mission went sideways. The one who'd listened to the testimony, studied the reports, and decided that Major Ashley Cooper was responsible for the decisions that had cost the unit 2 soldiers. Medical discharge. Reduction in rank. The paperwork had stripped her major's rank from public record like it had never existed, buried it so deep that civilians wouldn't find it even if they looked. And Hendricks had looked. She'd seen him do it. Torres appeared at the bay entrance. Pressure's dropping. We need type and cross, and I need someone on blood. I'm on it, Ashley said. Her voice was the same pitch, the same calm tone. Her hands resumed their work. Wound assessment. Checking for exit wounds. looking for anything the paramedics might have missed. Her fingers moved across the shrapnel embedded in his back with the clinical detachment of someone who'd done this 100 times. There was a piece of metal about the size of a thumbnail just beneath the skin at the angle of his shoulder blade. Shrapnel. Could be iron, could be aluminum, could be something that came from an IED someone had buried in a road 8,000 miles away. The unit patch inside his jacket lining was still there. She found it when she was checking for internal bleeding, her fingers reaching under the fabric automatic as breath. 75th Regiment. It was the kind of thing that civilians missed. The kind of thing that only another soldier would hide in the place where a patch went. Insurance. Memory. Something to hold onto when you stop believing in official things. Dr. Raymond Ashford appeared in the doorway at 2:49 a.m. She felt him before she saw him, the way the air changed when someone was observing rather than participating. His eyes narrowed as he watched her work. She kept her face neutral, kept her movements precise, kept the kind of perfect hospital composure that came from years of being trained to show nothing. But Ashford was the kind of observer who noticed small things. The way her fingers moved with something beyond standard nurse training. The way she'd immediately assessed not just the wound pattern but the angle of impact, the trajectory implications. The way she'd found the unit patch without hesitation, her fingers knowing exactly where to look. His eyes tracked to the tattoo. The faded ink. The specific date beneath it. She didn't see his face change. Didn't see him make any decision. But when she looked up for just a fraction of a second, she saw him note something. File something away. The kind of observation that felt like a camera shutter closing. "Let's get him stable," Ashford said. His voice carried the administrative weight of a man who'd learned that tone was a form of power. Full imaging. CT chest and abdomen. We'll need to get some of that shrapnel out before it migrates. Ashley returned to her work. The patient's blood type came back B positive. She hung another unit. The O2 sat was dropping. She got the crash cart into position even though she wasn't asked, because the placement suggested Ashford was thinking the same thing she was thinking. This man's stability was provisional at best. The overhead intercom crackled to life at 3:13 a.m., the sound cutting through the ward like something inevitable. Nurse Coop to administration. Nurse Coop to administration. Torres looked at her from across the bay. That nickname's got to get old. Ashley pulled off her gloves. It's fine. She wasn't sure why she said that. It wasn't fine. The nickname was demotion served fresh every time her name came through a speaker. Nurse Coop, not Nurse Cooper. Casual. Dismissive. The kind of diminishment that worked because it sounded like friendliness. Ashford was already on the phone at the central station, his shoulders angled away, his voice too low to hear. Whatever he was saying had the specific intensity of someone conducting business that mattered. His eyes met hers across the bay for just long enough to confirm that he knew something. That the tattoo had meant something. That the unit patch sewn into a jacket lining meant something. She walked toward administration with her hands still trembling, which was the kind of thing nobody was supposed to see, so she kept them moving, straightening charts, adjusting 4 bags, performing the small gestures that made trembling look like work. The kind of work that was invisible because it was so routine. Whatever was about to happen, she understood one thing with the absolute certainty that came from her training: Ashford had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. And a man in his position, a man who worked in a hospital where questions could be dangerous, would not let that kind of knowledge exist in someone else's head for very long. The overhead page crackled at 11:16 p.m., cutting through the quiet hum of the 3rd floor. Nurse Coop to administration. Nurse Coop to administration. The voice was professionally neutral, the kind of tone that carries no emotional weight until it does. Ashley heard it from the med station where she was restocking saline bags, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the fluorescent-lit darkness. Around her, the night shift skeleton crew, 2 other nurses, a resident who'd already lost 2 lines this evening, didn't look up. They never did. The nickname hung in the air like something contagious. Nurse Coop. Not Nurse Cooper. Not Ashley. Coop. Like she was a crate to be organized, labeled, filed away. She set down the bag she was holding and made her way toward the administrative wing, her footsteps echoing on tile that smelled faintly of bleach and something medicinal she couldn't name. The walk took for minutes. She'd timed it once, back in month 2 of employment when she was still trying to understand the geography of her new life. The hallways of Seattle General were different from military corridors, softer lighting, carpeted sections that muffled sound, paintings of generic landscapes in neutral grays and blues designed to offend no one. She missed the sharp architecture of Fort Bragg's med tent, the canvas walls that let you hear weather coming. Dr. Raymond Ashford was waiting near the supply closet on the 3rd-floor corridor, not in administration. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his white coat, the one that cost more than her weekly salary, the one that never had a wrinkle or a stain because he didn't actually treat patients. He managed them. He curated them. He was a man built on the principle that information was currency and secrets were leverage. His eyes tracked her as she approached, calculating something behind that practiced smile. Ashley. Thank you for coming. Not a request. The tone had teeth beneath the courtesy. She stopped 3 feet away, maintaining distance. You called? Supply closet. Now. It wasn't a request either. The closet was narrow, lined with compression bandages and 4 stands and boxes of sterile gauze marked with lot numbers. Ashford stepped inside after her and pulled the door closed. The space smelled like plastic packaging and stale air. No one could see them. No one would hear them. This was the calculation he'd made. That patient. The John Doe in Bay 4. Ashford's voice was conversational, the way a predator sounds before it strikes. You took an unusual interest in his intake assessment. Ashley's hands were empty. There was nothing to do with them, so she kept them at her sides. I performed a standard assessment. You lingered. You examined the posterior shoulder blade. You read his jacket lining. He paused, letting that settle. You know something about him. She didn't answer. Here's what's going to happen, Ashford continued, his voice dropping lower, the steel underneath becoming audible. You're not going to ask any questions about that patient's condition. You're not going to make any calls. You're not going to speak to anyone, social work, discharge planning, security, anyone, about his case. And you're definitely not going to mention anything you may have observed about him. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to something intimate and threatening. Because if you do, your contract won't survive the week. I'll pull it myself. 1 phone call and you're done here. No reference. No severance. No explanation. The paperwork will say insubordination and violation of patient privacy protocols. You understand me? She looked at him. Held a look. 1 measured breath in. 1 measured breath out. I understand. Good. He opened the door. The hallway fluorescence flooded in, harsh and immediate. Then we're clear. She didn't move immediately. The message had been delivered. The threat was quantifiable now, not a rumor or an implication, but a statement of fact. He had the power. She had complied. In Ashford's logic, the transaction was complete. But his mistake was thinking compliance meant acceptance. In her experience, the quietest people were often the ones calculating 3 moves ahead. The parking lot demotion came at 6:14 a.m., during shift change when the outgoing night crew and incoming day staff overlapped in the concrete lot where everyone parked. Ashford had timed it deliberately. He was standing near the staff entrance when Ashley emerged from her 8th hour, her badge clipped to her scrubs, her posture unchanged by 8 hours for insertions and vital sign checks and questions from family members about discharge timing. Around them, nurses filtered through the 30, maybe 40 of them coming and going, changing out of one uniform and into the exhaustion of the outside world. Ashley. He called her name with a smile that belonged in a recruitment video, the kind of smile that made him look like he cared about his staff. Walk with me. She could have refused. could have kept walking to her car, a 2008 Honda Civic with one broken tail light and a sticker from the VA that let her park in the preferred spots. Instead, she slowed, matched his pace, gave him the audience he'd already arranged. "Your performance review came back," he said, loud enough that the nurses nearest them could hear. "And we decided that your current assignment isn't utilizing your full skill set. Starting Monday, you're transitioning to post-op recovery. 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift. Monday through Friday. It's effective immediately, pending formal performance review." He placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was meant to look paternal, fatherly, kind. "I think this will be a wonderful opportunity for growth. The post-op team could really use your attention to detail." Post-op was a reassignment dressed in administrative language. Post-op meant day shift, which meant no continuity with the night crew. It meant 42 fewer hours per week. It meant isolation. It meant he could watch her more easily. The hand on her shoulder pressed down slightly, not enough to hurt, enough to be noticed. Around them, nurses had stopped pretending to ignore the conversation. Two of them, Jenny and Marcus from the ER, exchanged a glance that was somewhere between pity and relief that it wasn't happening to them. One of the day shift nurses smiled a little too brightly, the kind of smile that came with schadenfreude. "You deserved it," the smile said. "Whatever you did, you had it coming." Ashley took one measured breath. Then another. She felt the single tear begin its path down her cheek, and she let it, because refusing to cry would be a show of defiance and she was being too careful for that. She wiped it without looking away from his face. Without breaking the contact. The tear came and left, and her eyes remained steady on his, and in that steadiness was something that made Ashford's smile falter just slightly. "I wonder what you think I saw, Dr. Ashford," she said quietly, her voice level as a laser. "That frightens you this much." The moment held. Around them, the parking lot continued its rhythms. Car doors opened. Someone's alarm beeped. A radio played something distant and unimportant. Ashford's hand dropped from her shoulder. His smile maintained its shape but lost its conviction, and in that loss was a tiny victory, the kind that nobody else would recognize but that mattered completely. "Monday," he said. "Post-op, don't be late." She walked to her car without responding. The Civic's engine turned over on the second try, grinding slightly, the way aging things do. She sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the wheel and let the air conditioning run cold against her face. In the parking lot mirror, she could see him standing where they'd been, watching her pull out onto the main road. He was trying to figure out what she knew. That was the gift of his fear. It meant she wasn't invisible anymore. It meant something inside her had registered, had been recognized, and that recognition had terrified him enough to weaponize his authority against her. She drove home as the sun came up over Raleigh, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that looked nothing like the desert and everything like a second chance she wasn't sure she deserved. The shift stretched toward 3 a.m. like a held breath. Ashley had been reassigned to post-op recovery on the third floor, Ashford's clearest message yet. Distance. Isolation. Keep her away from the trauma bays where real work happened. The fluorescent lights above hummed their monotonous song as she moved through the recovery ward, checking lines and documenting vitals with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. 16 beds. 14 patients. 2 empty. She was charting the last vitals when the overhead page crackled. Code blue, Trauma Bay 4. Code blue, Trauma Bay 4. Her hands went still on the keyboard. That bed. She knew exactly which one. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm through the ceiling vents, and every nerve ending in her body ignited like a circuit breaker flipping to on. The intercom crackled again, all available staff to Trauma Bay 4. She was moving before the message finished. Post-op could wait. Every instinct said go. But when she reached the Trauma Bay entrance, Security Officer Davis, a thick-shouldered man with kind eyes who usually let her pass, stepped into her path, shaking his head. Dr. Ashford said no one except immediate attending. He looked genuinely sorry. "I got my orders," Coop. The code continued inside. She could hear the attending shouting commands, hear the crash cart being moved, hear the terrible silence between compressions where a heartbeat should have been. She stood in the hallway like a woman behind reinforced glass, watching her own irrelevance play out in real time. Through the bay window, she caught movement. The attending, Dr. Pierce, competent but slow under pressure, was reaching for the decompression kit. Wrong move. She'd run this scenario 100 times in her mind since Marjah. Tension pneumothorax didn't need a full needle decompression protocol. It needed precision. It needed speed. The attending's hands fumbled with the 18-gauge needle, his movements jerky, uncertain. He was panicking. The O2 sat was dropping, she could see it on the monitor from the hallway. 68. 65. The needle went in at the wrong angle. Too high. Between the third and fourth intercostal spaces instead of the second interclavicular line. No hiss of escaping air. No relief. The attending withdrew the needle, swearing audibly, reaching for another one. Ashley's breath came shallow and controlled. Tactical breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The kind of breathing that came when you were about to move against direct orders. She looked at Davis. His attention had shifted to the monitor, to the crisis unfolding 6 feet away. For 2.3 seconds, he wasn't watching the door. She moved. Not running, that would trigger a response. Walking. Fast. With the authority of someone who belonged there. Davis called out, but she was already past him, already inside the bay, already reading the room like a map of the problem before her. The attending spun toward her, anger flashing across his face. Get out. Now. But Ashley was already moving past him, already seeing what he couldn't see. She scanned the cart, her eyes tracking the equipment with mechanical precision. Her hands moved on their own. Muscle memory. 3 years of combat medicine doesn't erase itself just because you trade fatigues for scrubs. She found the MRE medical supplies on the patient's belongings cart, standard trauma admission protocol, and pulled the plastic waterproof bag. Inside, adhesive dressing, elastic wrap, a small sealed sterile field. The attending was still barking orders, still reaching for instruments with hands that trembled. Ashley didn't acknowledge him. Didn't ask permission. Didn't explain. Pain was information. Pain was data. The patient's blood pressure was tanking. 42/30. The monitor showed a sagging jugular vein, classic pneumothorax presentation. She had maybe 90 seconds before cardiac arrest became irreversible. She opened the sterile field with one hand while applying pressure with the heel of her palm to the affected area, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, textbook anatomy that lived in her muscle memory. The attending tried to push forward. Step back, she said. Not a request. A command. Her voice dropped an octave, and the room seemed to recognize something in that voice, some note of absolute authority that made people listen. The nurses froze. The resident froze. Even the attending took a half step back. She positioned the adhesive dressing over the wound, creating a 3-sided seal with the elastic wrap. Military field dressing technique. She'd done this under fire in a compound where the air smelled like diesel exhaust and blood, where the only light came from muzzle flashes. This was easier. This was clean. The hiss came, that precise, perfect hiss of air escaping from the pleural space. 12 milliliters of tension pneumothorax decompressing into the open atmosphere. The monitor shifted. O2 sat began climbing. 68. 72. 79. 85. 88. 92. Stable. The sinus rhythm returned, a beautiful, regular beat that meant the heart was remembering how to work again. The room went dead silent. Not the silence of shock. The silence of recognition. She was still pressing the dressing in place, still focused on the patient's breathing, still operating in that space where everything else ceased to exist. Only then did she notice the attending staring at her hands. At the way they moved. At the tattoo on her left wrist, the coordinates of Marjah, etched in faded black ink that she'd always kept hidden beneath long sleeves. One of the trauma nurses, a young woman named Chen, was looking at the patient. At his shoulder. At the 75th Ranger Regiment tattoo, fully visible now as the medics cut away more of his clothing. Then back at Ashley. The equations were adding up behind her eyes. The combat dressing. The decompression technique that came from field medicine, not hospital protocol. The voice that had commanded the room without raising its volume. "Get me a 16-gauge angiocath and 500 milliliters of packed RBC," Ashley said, still focused on the patient. The attending moved to comply before he even processed that she'd given him an order. "Cardiac monitor continuous. I need a portable ultrasound." The commands came naturally, each one precise, each one necessary. Somewhere behind her, she heard Davis's radio crackling. He was calling it in, reporting that she'd overstepped. Ashford would hear within minutes. Ashford would move. Ashford would decide this was the moment to push her out entirely. But right now, in this bay, with a patient stabilizing under her hands, none of that mattered. What mattered was the next 6 hours. What mattered was keeping this man alive long enough for surgery. What mattered was the unit patch she'd glimpsed in his belongings, that faded emblem of 75th Ranger Regiment, stitched with hands that no longer moved with military precision. The patient's vitals steadied. Blood pressure climbing. Heart rate normalizing. The attending was calling for transport to the surgical suite, his voice steady now, his hands moving with renewed confidence born from watching someone else solve the unsolvable. But he wasn't the one who solved it. Everyone in the room knew that. And as Ashley stepped back from the gurney, peeling off her gloves with movements that carried the clean efficiency of someone trained to work in contaminated environments, she saw Davis in the doorway, phone in hand, his expression caught between awe and the certain knowledge that he'd just witnessed something that would cost him his shift supervisor's approval. The patient was being wheeled toward surgery. The attending was updating the surgical team. The nurses were restocking the crash cart. The room was already moving on to the next emergency, the next crisis, the next patient who would need saving. But Ashley stayed still for just a moment, her eyes on the empty bed, her hand still remembering the weight of compressed air escaping through tissue, the smell of antiseptic and adrenaline, the particular silence that comes after the fighting stops and you finally understand that sometimes the best warriors are the ones trained to heal. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar drone as Ashford moved through the hospital corridor, each stride purposeful, each breath measured. His face had returned to its familiar mask of authority, but his eyes burned with something colder than anger, calculation. He reached the nurse's station, pulled his phone from his pocket, and made the first call at 3:51 a.m., his voice dropping low enough that only the ward clerk could hear fragments, names, dates, phrases that didn't belong in casual conversation. By the time he made the second call, his jaw had tightened into something that looked like certainty. The third call took less than 90 seconds. He hung up, set his phone face down on the desk, and waited. By morning, the hospital had already begun to turn against her. Ashley's badge wouldn't scan. She stood at the time clock at 6:22 a.m., still in her civilian clothes, still holding the folded hospital badge in her left hand. The magnetic strip caught the fluorescent light as she swiped again. Nothing. The doors didn't open. The system didn't beep. Around her, arriving nurses moved through the doors with their usual morning efficiency, their badges registering soft metallic clicks that felt like signatures of belonging. She tried once more. The machine refused her. That was when she understood that Ashford hadn't been making threats in the supply closet. He'd been making promises. Her schedule had vanished from the digital system entirely. Not reassigned. Not adjusted. Deleted. HR called her into the administrative office on the second floor at 6:51 a.m., a small room that smelled like industrial air freshener and something else, the particular staleness of institutional decisions made behind closed doors. The HR manager, Patricia Devons, sat behind a desk with a single folder positioned directly in front of her. She didn't look up as Ashley entered. We need to discuss your employment status, Patricia said. Ashley remained standing. The composure came easy now, one measured breath. She had learned years ago that sitting during these conversations meant acceptance of the outcome. Your patient contact last night violated Protocol 17 in your employment agreement. Unauthorized intervention in an active medical procedure. Additionally, you demonstrated insubordination toward Dr. Ashford during the shift. Patricia's voice had the tone of someone reading instructions. Given this pattern of behavior, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. I saved his life, Ashley said. 10 words. Exactly. That's not the point. Patricia finally looked up, and her eyes held no malice, only weariness. The point is protocol. The point is chain of command. The point is that you overstepped your authority. Ashley understood then that Ashford had already called this woman too. That this had been decided before the sun rose. She was back in her car by 7:06 a.m., sitting in the employee parking garage with the engine off, the cardboard box of personal items resting on the passenger seat. The box contained a coffee mug from a gift exchange in December, a framed photo of Daniel at his high school graduation, 3 pens that no longer wrote, a half-empty bottle of ibuprofen, and at the very bottom, beneath everything else, the faded unit patch, the 75th Ranger Regiment emblem sewn inside the lining of her jacket 3 years before she ever walked into Seattle General. She had returned her scrubs to the hospital laundry before leaving, folding them one final time with the precision that muscle memory had burned into her hands. Hospital corners that could have passed inspection at Fort Benning. The folds so precise they could have been measured with a ruler. She had folded uniforms exactly this way for 12 years, and this was the second time she was folding them knowing she would never wear them again. The first time had been in a barracks at Kandahar when the medical discharge papers came through. The rain started at 8:13 a.m. It came down in sheets that hammered the parking garage with a sound like applause or artillery, depending on how you listened. Ashley sat without moving, her hand still positioned on the steering wheel at 10:02, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked windshield. In the box beside her lay the evidence of 2 professional lives ended. The photo of Daniel was still on top of the pile of her things. His smile in that graduation photo was wider than she had seen it in months. He'd walked across that stage believing his mother was a nurse. Simple. Stable. Safe. At 8:38 a.m., footsteps echoed through the parking garage. They came fast, the rubber soles of running shoes hitting concrete with the urgent rhythm of someone who was either chasing something or running from something. Ashley heard the breathing before she heard the voice, ragged, adolescent, the sound of a body not yet fully grown pushing hard against its own limitations. Her door opened without her opening it, and Daniel stood there, 17 years old, dark-haired like his father, with eyes that had learned their clarity from hers. "Mom," he said, breathing hard, his voice still caught between the octaves of childhood and manhood. "They need to see these." In his hands he held a shadow box. Polished wood. Glass front. Inside, arranged with military precision, were medals that hadn't seen daylight in 3 years. Bronze star. Silver star with oak leaf cluster. Purple heart. Purple heart. The ribbons were still vibrant despite the years of storage in the back of the hall closet, the medals themselves reflecting the grey light of the parking garage like captured stars. "Daniel," Ashley said. Her voice remained level. One measured breath. "What are you doing here?" "Dad called me." His words came fast, urgent, the way teenagers spoke when they were afraid of being interrupted. "He said you called the house. He said you sounded different. So I drove over and I saw the box in your passenger seat through the window and I remembered where you kept these and I thought maybe I was right about what you were. And I drove back to the house and I got them and I came here." The rain hammered the windshield. The medals caught the light again. "It wasn't a request," Ashley said quietly. "That was in the closet for a reason." "Because you never wanted to talk about it," Daniel said. He wasn't asking. At 17, he had already begun to understand that some truths were harder to voice than others. "But you should have. You should have told them who you are." "I'm telling you no," Ashley said. She turned to face her son fully, and when she did, something in her chest shifted. Not cracked. Not broke. Shifted. "Put those back." He didn't move. "Mom, I know you're scared. I know something happened at the hospital that made you." "Daniel." One word. The voice was different now. Not soft. Not hard. Something in between. Something that had been waiting 3 years to speak. "Get in the car." He moved. Some part of him had always known to listen when his mother used that particular tone. The shadow box went into the back seat, carefully, reverently, as if it contained something fragile. The rain fell harder as he climbed into the passenger seat, pushing the cardboard box aside. "Where are we going?" he asked. She didn't answer. She started the engine, and the car moved through the parking garage toward the exit, toward the rain, toward something she couldn't yet name but could already feel approaching, like the sound of distant rotors cutting through the morning air. Daniel's voice carried across the hospital entrance like a bugle call that echoed off every wall, every window, every nurse station monitor and fluorescent fixture. "My mother is Major Ashley Cooper, U.S. Army Rangers." The words hung in the rain-soaked air between them, 17 years old, 5'8", holding a shadow box of medals like he was presenting evidence at a trial. Which, Ashley understood in that moment, he was. She didn't move toward him. She didn't run. She simply stood there in the parking garage entrance, hands at her sides, while the afternoon shift arriving behind him began to slow their pace. Phone started coming out. Someone whispered. Rain hammered the concrete like applause for a show that hadn't been authorized by anyone in administration. The next voice was trembling. It belonged to a nurse from the ER, a younger woman named Sarah who'd always been kind to Ashley in passing, always remembered her name even when everyone else called her Coop. Sarah was holding Hendricks' personnel file. The one he'd been clutching when he woke. The one Ashford had confiscated and kept locked in his office, 3 floors above their heads. Somehow it had survived the chaos of shift change, the shuffling of charts, the organized chaos of a Level 1 trauma center, and ended up in Sarah's trembling hands. "Bronze Star," Sarah read aloud, her voice barely steady. The file trembled like wind was moving it. Like Sarah herself was trying to hold something too heavy. "Silver Star." A pause. Another name on the list. 2 purple hearts. Sarah looked up, looked at Ashley standing in the parking garage entrance in scrubs still damp from the ER. And a Navy Cross recommendation from a SEAL Team 3 commander. "It says here," Sarah's hand shook so badly the paper nearly fell. "It says these were earned in blood during operations this reader is not cleared to discuss." The rain intensified. Nobody moved to get it. The shadow box in Daniel's hands caught water that slid off the polished wood like it was shedding tears. That was when the phone rang. Not her phone. Not Daniel's. A phone in Seattle General's administrative office on the 14th floor, ringing in a room where Dr. Ashford was currently destroying files, deleting emails, attempting to rebuild a narrative where a medically discharged nurse with a 3-year employment gap had somehow fabricated the entire identity of a United States Army Ranger. His hands were moving fast. Too fast. The kind of fast that happens when you know the walls are coming down. The call came from the Pentagon. Specifically, from a defense intelligence officer whose credentials and authority level made hospital administrators go pale when she introduced herself. The conversation took exactly 4 minutes. What it explained took much longer to sink in. Ashley Cooper had been conducting protective surveillance on a classified witness in a war crimes investigation. That witness, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hendricks, had been moved to civilian cover after his unit was compromised. The cover story was his medical discharge. The tattoo was verification. The faded unit patch sewn inside his jacket lining was his recognition signal. And Dr. Raymond Ashford, in his panic to discover why his mysterious patient seemed so important, had filed institutional inquiries that had triggered automated federal monitoring protocols. Those protocols had led auditors directly to his pattern. 12 years of it. Prescription medications ordered under patient names who'd never received them. Oxycodone. Fentanyl. Benzodiazepines. $47,000 in black market pharmaceutical sales moved through a clinic in the Haiti neighborhood where people didn't ask too many questions and cash transactions didn't require explanations. The same neighborhood where Ashford's 2023 BMW X7 was parked every third Thursday, engine running, loading payment from a man named Curtis who'd been flagged by the DEA since 2019. The defense intelligence officer was polite. Federal. Inevitable. She asked for Dr. Ashford. She was told he was in his office. She said he wouldn't be for long. Within 90 minutes, federal agents who moved like they had rehearsed every step walked through the ER entrance, through the doors that Ashford had controlled absolutely for the past 6 years, and up to his office on the administrative level. They had badges. Warrants. The kind of authority that made hospital security stand down before anyone even asked them to. They had handcuffs that clicked against Ashford's wrists with a sound like a mechanism locking. Like a trial concluding. Like the universe settling back into alignment. Ashley stood in the ER entrance while it happened. She was wearing her dress uniform. Army green. 5 rows of ribbons on her chest. The uniform had been tailored in 2019, before the medical discharge, before the 3-year gap. Before everything. It fit perfectly. Some things, she understood, don't wear out. Some things just wait. The nurses watched as the federal agents led Ashford past the triage desk. His face had gone the color of hospital linoleum. His mouth was moving but no words were coming. His eyes locked onto Ashley's once as they moved past, and what she saw there wasn't rage or defiance. It was the look of a man who had finally understood the full scope of his miscalculation. That was the last she saw of him for 6 months. The next part of the story moved at the speed of federal investigations. Paperwork. Depositions. Her medical discharge being reviewed, questioned, reclassified. The court-martial that had ended her Army career, the one Ashford had observed from the convening authority's chair, was being audited for procedural irregularities that went back to the original mission brief in Marjah. Someone had altered the after-action reports. Not Hendricks. Not Ashley. Someone with access to classified files and a reason to want her silence. The someone currently sitting in a federal detention facility in North Carolina, waiting for trial. 6 months to the day after Ashford was led from the building, Ashley walked into Seattle General at 2,100 hours for the night shift. The same shift she'd been working when the wounded stranger arrived with no identification. The same shift where she'd folded her scrubs one final time, one final indignity, in a laundry room that smelled like bleach and endings. She was walking past the security desk by the main entrance when she saw him. He was wearing a uniform now. Not Army. Not anything with authority. A navy blue security guard jacket with Seattle General Medical Center stitched across the back in white thread. His name tag read Ashford, S. His eyes were scanning the badges of incoming staff with the hollow precision of someone doing a job that had been inflicted upon him as punishment, which it had. The hospital board had made a decision. He would not practice medicine again. But he would work. He would stand at the entrance he once controlled absolutely. He would watch people move past him into positions of respect that he no longer held. He recognized her immediately. His hand twitched toward the clipboard. His mouth started to form something like an explanation or an apology or excuse. Ashley met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him with the kind of quiet dignity that comes from having already survived the worst and chosen not to break, chose not to fracture, chose not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her diminished. Then she walked past him into the hospital where she worked as Major Ashley Cooper, with her commission restored, her rank reclassified, a career officially pardoned. She took the elevator to the 4th-floor recovery ward. Hendricks was sitting upright in bed, the afternoon light coming through the window behind him turning his profile into something that looked almost peaceful. The tattoo on his left shoulder blade was visible above the hospital gown, 75th Ranger Regiment in military Gothic, faded by sun and time and the weight of decisions that had cost people everything. He looked up when she entered. Recognition, again. But different this time. He knew exactly who she was. "I was wrong, Major," he said. His voice was soft. The kind of soft that comes from a man who's had 3 months to think about the cost of being right about the wrong things, about signing documents that destroyed careers, about the architecture of injustice built one authorization at a time. About Marjah. About everything. Ashley didn't answer immediately. She pulled a chair beside his bed and sat down. Outside, the Raleigh evening was turning dark. Inside, the hospital continued its endless work of keeping people alive, monitors beeping, ventilators wheeze-humming, the sound of rubber soles on polished tile moving toward tomorrow. "I know," she said finally. And she did. She'd known for 3 years. She'd known the moment she recognized his tattoo. She'd known the moment he coded and the attending surgeon froze. She'd known the moment her hands moved on their own with the precision of muscle memory that never forgets what it's trained to do. She'd known the moment she was willing to save the man who destroyed her because that's what a nurse does. That's what a ranger does. That's who she was, with or without the uniform, with or without anyone's permission. "You need to sign something," she said. She wasn't asking. The Hendricks she'd served with in Marjah would have recognized the tone. The tone that means now. The tone that means this is not a discussion. He signed the affidavit without reading it. He understood. The affidavit would recant his original testimony. It would officially exonerate her from the charges that had ended her career. It would restore everything the court-martial had taken. She watched him sign. She watched the pen move across the paper with a hand that was steady. 5 weeks of recovery had given him that much back. She watched him finish, set the pen down, and look at her with eyes that had aged a decade in the span of 6 months. "What happens now?" he asked. Ashley stood. She folded the affidavit carefully. She placed it inside her uniform jacket where it rested against her ribs, against her heartbeat, against the place where everything she'd survived was catalogued in permanent record. "Now I go back to work," she said. "I save lives. I don't give anyone the satisfaction of my anger." She walked to the door. She paused for a moment at the threshold, silhouetted in the hallway light. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint, the kind that comes from power held in reserve, from knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to, from understanding that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's continuing to live well, to work with purpose, to save people, to matter in ways that nobody can take away with a signature or a title or a uniform that gets folded one last time in a hospital laundry room. The hospital board had offered her chief of trauma medicine, director of emergency services, administrative positions with windows and authority and the kind of salary that could rebuild everything she'd lost. She'd turned them down. All of them. Because that's not where the work actually happens. That's not where lives hang in the balance at 3 in the morning with a patient who needs someone whose hands don't tremble, whose judgment is clear, whose presence in a room full of fear means someone knows exactly what to do. She was back in scrubs within the week. Blue ones, carefully folded, insignia cleaned, ready for another night shift where she would work alongside people who now understood that the quiet nurse pushing the med cart had saved her commanding officer's life with field medicine and a piece of packaging material. Who'd done it knowing he'd destroyed her, and done it anyway. The hospital commissioned a new veterans wing 3 months later. Dedicated trauma bays for military personnel, with special protocols and resources and the kind of infrastructure that Ashley had fought for in meetings where she used medical terminology instead of military terminology, where she built her case using evidence and outcomes and the kind of logic that administration understood. She stood at the ribbon cutting in her dress uniform, and they offered her the director position again. She declined again. She simply asked for one assignment, to work the trauma rotation in the new wing. 3rd shift. The one where the wounded strangers arrived at hours when most of the world was sleeping, when the sky over Raleigh was black and the only light came from inside the hospital, from the people who'd chosen to spend their nights keeping others alive. The closing of Ashford's chapter came quietly. He worked the security desk for 6 months before he transferred to a strip mall urgent care facility in Tucson, Arizona. The name tag read Steve. The hiring manager had no idea about his past. He was just a middle-aged man with references that didn't quite add up, a background check that showed some inconsistencies, and the kind of careful politeness that comes from someone who knows exactly how far he's fallen. When patients called him doctor, a habit from his previous life, a muscle memory of respect, he would flinch. And he would correct them. Quietly. Every time. Heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub, saving lives in the dark. Like this video if you believe in honoring those who served. If you have military in your family, past or present, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe and let's keep going.